Thank you very much. Yeah, I just want to echo Chad. Welcome everybody. I think this is an amazing venue. I've just sent a photo to a colleague of mine, my counterpart in North America, and the comment that came back was, "This looks nothing like winter in the Midwest." So, and I think just another point, just to set your mind at ease, the last time I gave a talk at Grove, the last time I was invited to talk about Grove was actually at one of those innovators clubs. And clearly I spoke too long because that was 5 years ago. This is the first time they've invited me back, so I promise I'll keep it dead short so that I can get invited back to speak and get access again.
Thank you.
So super briefly, I've been asked just to talk about the Mimecast State of Email Security Report. Now, we bring out a lot of these kinds of reports all the time. They're useful in various ways. The reason I like this particular one is this is not us telling you what we're seeing. This is actually you telling us, maybe not you personally, but people in your kind of roles telling us what you're seeing. And as Chad mentioned, it's across a broad number of regions, but more importantly, it includes very specifically a very large number of South African businesses and South African CISOs, IT managers, CIOs, those kind of people. So just a couple of call-outs. So the big thing that kind of came through in this report was that ransomware, particularly in the South African region, is still a problem. And that's actually contrary to what you might read if you're listening to things that are kind of focused more on parts of Europe and parts of North America. And if you actually look at the stats, and I look at these stats quite closely, particularly on things like ransomware, or as one of a very sort of close ex-colleague of mine likes to call them, trying to avoid the word ransomware, altogether, because it's become extortion actually. It's more about the various types of extortion. It's not really the ransom. Sometimes there is actually not even a ransom. Sometimes it's some form of extortion. We should really be thinking about it as extortion. And what's interesting actually is these things come in waves. So right now it's taking a little bit of a dip in places like North America, UK, Ireland. It's actually way up in odd places like Norway, Denmark, parts of Germany, and guess what, South Africa. So that's kind of one of the first takeaways, and that's what we're seeing. That's what some of our opposition are seeing. That's what some of people who kind of work, some of our ecosystem partners are seeing. So that's a big takeaway. That's still a problem. So if anyone says to you, "Oh, Red Report said ransomware is going down," you go, "Not here, sorry." And it's kind of obvious when you think about it. If somebody puts an electric fence around their orchard, where does someone else go? It's been stealing all the fruit, go to the low-hanging fruit where there's no electric fence around the orchard. That's kind of the logic of it. And we're in this area where we're less well protected. And we're not, we're in fairly good company if you consider Norway and, some of those Northern European countries. So we're kind of there. Just there's a whole bunch of other takeaways. One of the big ones which we got from talking to people like yourselves is it's becoming harder and harder to get a seat at the table and have a meaningful conversation with the board. So there's a lot of content in there, which is very valuable to having kind of board level. And it doesn't matter if it's necessarily your board of directors, but it might be your risk board, might be just someone who's not talking about IT and cybersecurity. And it's about taking those nuggets and making them sort of speaking in the same kind of language as those sorts of people would like to hear, and talking about things that impact the business. So there's some takeaways there. There's bits and pieces of takeaways. I've spoken about the ransomware. I don't want to go into too much detail. Just two more things really on the report. Otherwise, I'm going to end up not getting invited for another 5 years. Is there's a lot of impersonation going on, domain impersonation. And one of the big things that we've seen, and it's kind of taken on a bit of a global wave, and we've been at it for a long time. It's one of Mimecast services, is implementing DMARC in an environment. What's quite interesting is large number of organizations in the report said no, they've seen their domain being impersonated, but a relatively small number, 4 out of 10 respondents said no, they've actually done anything about DMARC. And then I mentioned to Chad, actually, I just purely randomly, this thing just popped into one of my Slack channels today, and someone said, "Hey, do you know that if you're doing anything to do with PCI, anything to do with credit cards and credit card processing and all that, you don't necessarily have to be a bank, it could be a retailer, it could be any of those organizations that have to comply with PCI. Right now, it's one of those nice to haves in the PCI standard. The next PCI standard, it's going to be a requirement that your DMARC has actually got to get up to P equals reject status." So just throwing that out there. It's still a ways away, but these projects, particularly if you've got a fairly large number of domains, got a fairly complex environment, these things can take 12 or more months to kind of roll out. So that was quite an interesting takeaway for me. And I think the last one really is, you can't kind of leave a conversation like this with the year that we've had with artificial intelligence and all of the noise around artificial intelligence, and we've got quite a lot of good content around that. I think the big takeaway is everybody's talking about it. Everybody says they're going to be doing something about it. The reality is it's very, very mixed. and you can't get too caught up in the hype. It's got a place, absolutely. We use artificial intelligence, but I think it's one of those things where if you're still talking about it, there's a problem. It should actually almost be hidden from the end user. It should definitely just be part of your overall security stack, because absolutely, and I think ChatGPT is a very good kind of analog for AI in general, because what it does sometimes is quite amazing. Comes out with things that are quite surprising. Every now and again I do something with it and think like, wow, you just blown my mind. But equally I do things with it and go, jeepers, you're absolutely hallucinating. I don't know what crack you're on that you actually came back with that response. And that's the problem with AI. It can be brilliant up to a point, and then there's just always those false positives that come through. And as long as you kind of acknowledge that and know where they are, and you're augmenting that either with people or other technology that's not AI, that's trained on different data sets, etc., then you're kind of covered. So there's some good content there. And I think maybe just to hand back to Chad, and if anyone wants to get hold of this, I'm sure we're going to inundate you and make you pay for the privilege of this beautiful sunset by getting an email, which please don't delete it. Click on the link, download the report. There's some good stuff in there. But I'm going to hand back to Chad, and maybe you can kind of drill in on the DMARC side of things, so there's some interesting takeaways there.